What's up, Data Transformers? This is Bolaji, and welcome to Data Career Transformations, the show where we watch analytics engineers, data analysts, and data scientists transform their careers. Today, we are talking to a data engineer who believes in scaling organizations by lifting the floor while extending the ceiling. He believes in success as a flywheel, so build with people, strengthen with processes, reinforce with technology, and repeat. But here's what you don't know about this man. He's obsessed with 3D printing. His goal, a 3D printed lamp in every room in the house.
Really?
He's obsessed with good food.
Yum.
The Michelin Guide announcements are his Grammys. I mean, he is obsessed with good music. He might be listening to Thames one day, Doechii the next, and State Champs the third.
That
That's
was
punk
legitness.
bands,
Yeah,
for those of y'all who aren't in the know. And this man is obsessed with Steve's. Most mornings, they share a banana together. Oh, Steve is his cat, by the way. He's obsessed with data, operational efficiency, and eating more chicken. Please help me welcome the senior lead data engineer at the Chick-Fil-A from Atlanta, Georgia, Tim Castillo.
Damn,
What up,
son,
Tim?
where'd you find this?
That was an amazing intro. I don't think I've ever gotten the WWE, UFC, MMA intro.
Yes, sir. Yes,
from the ringleader.
sir.
Appreciate it. That was awesome.
It is well deserved. It is well deserved. Been just a phenomenal contributor and presence in the DBT community. You always have something positive to share. You always got, no pun intended, some nuggets for everyone, whether literal or metaphorical. And we just learn a lot whenever you are part of the conversation. So thank you for being here today, Tim. This is going to be fun. My whole family are big fans of Chick-fil-A, the brand. Now, you were a data engineer before you got to Chick-fil-A, so we're going to cover the whole gamut. But first, we got to go there, man. What's it like to work at such a well-recognized brand?
It's interesting to say the least. I mean, it's very easy to talk about what I do and the type of impact and how it relates to other people being in the quick service food space, as opposed to B2B SaaS. It's really hard to explain to your family, this is what marketing attribution does. And when you click on that page, it takes you to the other page. But when you click on the email, it does that thing.
Yeah.
Or I'm just I help figure out where to put the next Chick-fil-A. And we use data to do that. So it's really interesting to be able to talk about that and really contextualize. Also really means I get a lot of good questions, a lot of good follow-up about what does that actually mean? What does it do? And the type of stuff we do. So yeah, it's a good time.
Man, I got to tell you, my family have been so spoiled in terms of being Chick-fil-A customers that we are always comparing other fast food experiences to Chick-fil-A. The food is quality. Don't get me wrong, but going to Chick-fil-A is a different experience. There's a lot of info. I know you're not responsible for all of that, as far as I know. You might be the secret sauce, though. Tim might be the secret sauce. But I got to give credit to the Chick-fil-A brand for the intentionality and the operational efficiency. I know that's a really big value for you. I just wanted to kind of share that and get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why when I was looking for my next role, or when I was interviewing at the time, that was one of the core tenets that really appealed to me about Chick-fil-A. A lot of the past 5-ish years of my career have been focused on early stage startups. A lot of places that had begun to scale, but I was either consulting or in one capacity or another, and wasn't really there to be able to see it scale, or be a part of that really big journey of, how do we get to 100 to 10,000?
Right.
And so, one of the really big things I was looking for was I want to be a part of something that is large, but also efficient. Large that is also intentional and cares a lot about operational efficiency.
Okay.
And that is 100% what Chick-fil-A stands for, about doing things intentionally, doing things with care,
Yes.
doing things with the guiding principles of efficiency, of quality service, of high quality food as things go along. And that propagates over to the data teams. That is one of the things I cared about as a data engineer, which is I've been on a lot of teams where we did a lot of ad hoc stuff, where we tried to figure things out on the fly, and 80% of our time was spent firefighting or trying to figure out or try to figure out what I was going to do next. And we were just building a stack of cards. But Chick-fil-A, incredibly intentional and incredibly thought out about how data is used, about how do we sustainably do this and how do we sustainably grow as an organization, not just with restaurants, but also in terms of data teams, because we have a whole bunch of them. Like we have so many different departments that depend on each other and work with each other, and figuring out how to scale that usage of data is incredibly important.
Wow. Wow. This is fascinating. Okay, so I appreciate you indulging us on the Chick-fil-A bit. I do want to share for people who are like, goodness, how do I get my Chick-fil-A job, whatever that dream job might be for you as a data professional? Here are some of the jobs that led to Tim eventually working at Chick-fil-A.
Let's go back to the beginning of your career. I was a software engineer at a couple of Fortune 500 enterprise companies.
IBM?
Yeah,
and
IBM.
Roche. I actually worked at IBM as well. So we got that in common. I was on the marketing side in software group. So you spent a year at IBM as a software engineer and also a couple of years at Roche as a software engineer. But then you ended up at the very reputable Brooklyn data company, senior analytics engineer. I got to ask, your software engineering work, Tim, was that data adjacent? Were you actually doing data work, or was it more coding? And what was that work like?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It was very data adjacent.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the first part of my career was very haphazard and kind of a little over the place, but I was just me, just being a little ambitious and trying to see things out. Yeah, at these enterprise companies, and also there were a couple other companies that I either mention or don't mention in between those companies and Brooklyn Data, depending on the context. But it was really just like, I just wanted to build stuff. I was young. I was fresh out of college. I just wanted to learn more and build stuff. So I was always data adjacent, building stuff like component libraries for charts and visualizations, or abstractions over like YAML extractions over Airflow, SQL temperators like dbt and such. I was kind of just hodgepodge, like trying to build up developer tools and just really enjoying that. And, eventually somehow caught the startup bug, also caught the data bug at some point in time too. And did a very brief stint at another company where I was a data scientist for about a week.
My goodness. What is that story? How in the world?
Yeah. So I caught the data bug, joined it, and it was just like, I was just absolutely terrified by like this massive lack of processes, this lack of structure, this lack of guardrails that the data science teams had that had grown like really used to in software engineering. So I had a whole bunch of one-on-ones with the team and just got to know my team members, and they were expressing a whole lot of pain points. And these pain points were all things that like, I was like, wait, this has already been solved. This solutions already exist for like 20 years. This is stuff like simple stuff in software engineering, like version control, automated testing, project management processes.
Wow.
And so it really hurt me to like see people live really stressful lives, live a horrible work-life balance, because when there were answers just outside of their purview. So very quickly, it's just like, hey, what can I do to help bring in some of these like, how can I solve some of these problems, introduce some more software engineering best practices and conventions, and really help like build a better foundation for the team. That is when I became a data engineer. That was the apex of it all. I was just like, hey, like there are these problems that engineering has solved before. Can we bring them into data? And that is how it happened. And I really enjoyed doing that. That's when I first found about DBT. That's when I learned about data modeling. That's when I learned about orchestration and data quality and such. And I enjoyed it so much that I wanted to do it again, which is when I got into consulting, which is when I found out into Brooklyn Data. And that's when that amazing chapter of my life happened.
Incredible. That's incredible. Oh my goodness. So you actually got to work on the front lines with data scientists, saw their pain points, sought to use some of those software engineering best principles that you already were familiar with to help improve their work-life balance. DBT happened to come along at that moment, and it sounds like it was a tool for you to help them solve some of those problems.
Yeah. It was like It was very much like, hey, like let's try to solve these problems. Let's help reduce this workload and the strain on people. Let's remove this on-call rotation that's had because you have queries that are running at the most random times that are completely erratic.
Hmm.
Let's add some automation so people don't manually do this once a quarter.
Incredible, incredible. Do you remember, Tim, how you learned about DBT? Did somebody introduce it to you, or you discovered it online? Were you in communities?
I think it was a good mix of random Googling, and eventually I probably stumbled on a Medium post from someone because like I knew the keywords that I wanted to look up for,
Gotcha.
which were things that like I'd been familiar to in software engineering. Stuff like orchestrating, such as declarative, such as version control and management. And DBT did an amazing job at that time positioning itself to pop up with those words.
Huh.
Like when I was looking for it, I was just like, well, so yeah, pretty much the problem statement was I need a way to like chain together
Yes.
SQL statements
Yes.
and version control them
Right.
because I wasn't going to keep doing it like in stored procedures in some random SQL database that someone had. And DBT just came up, and I was just like, this sounds great. This sounds super easy. This sounds like an amazing framework and foundation to build on top of. Let's go with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a thread that I noticed, Tim, in reading about some of your early work in your career and also hearing some of your stories right now. You strike me as a problem solver. You strike me as someone as very inquisitive, I should say. I remember reading about some of the projects you worked on. For example, you watched 70 hours of Netflix for science. For science. You also created an interactive visualization project of 1,800 Chipotle orders. I'm like, what are we doing here? So you always seem to find interesting problems and you seem to enjoy solving them.
Yeah. I appreciate that you found like the little Easter eggs at the bottom of my LinkedIn. Those are more just jokes for people to look at. Like once they get that far down. But yes, yeah. After college, I had some time in between my first job because IBM had like very like strict like, hey, here's when you start. So I had like a month or two in between graduation and starting. So I was like, yeah, let's binge Netflix and do something with it at the same time.
Why
So yeah,
not?
I watched every episode of Friends,
Oh my gosh.
scraped the scripts from all of it, and did some NLP and data visualization stuff for it. And then like the Chipotle stuff. I mean, like I wouldn't identify myself necessarily as like a problem solver more than other people, but like that was a problem I was trying to solve. Like I was a 21, 22-year-old adult male, like living with a bunch of college boys.
Uh-huh.
We were broke and we wanted protein.
Right.
So we were looking for the most cost-effective way to milk Chipotle as much as we could. And probably one of the better ways to do it was to understand what other people ordered and the macros associated with it.
That is hilarious and also really fascinating. And so when we see Tim Castillo, the senior lead data engineer at Chick-fil-A, I mean, formerly of Dagster Labs and Brooklyn Data Company, he's also the guy who binge-watched Friends and wrote all these scripts and models for Chipotle orders. You got to start somewhere, folks. You got to start somewhere.
Which is why like, I'm a huge advocate for like side projects. Amazing way to learn, amazing way to refine your skill set. Also just a good way to have fun with it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is fun. This is fun. I'm interested though, Tim, particularly because you got to work so closely with data scientists early on in your profession. I love to ask this question about, it's almost like the sorting hat. Where are you a data analyst, a data engineer, an analytics engineer, or a data scientist? How did you settle firmly into this data engineering lane? Why are you not a data scientist today?
I think at this point I've worn every single hat and may have formally or informally had every title. But no matter what's happened, I've slowly, sometimes very quickly, like redirected myself, and the world has just pushed me back into data engineering.
Wow.
From one way or another. Whether it might have been that 1 week I was a data scientist, whether it was my time as like an analytics engineer technically at
Yes.
Brooklyn Data. And I chose to be like, when I applied to Brooklyn Data and I joined it, I was very intentionally an analytics engineer because I was just like, hey, like I have the engineering know-how. I get the general gist of what I want to know as a data engineer. But as someone new to data, I don't really know about data or system or like how people use data.
Wow.
So that's where I really wanted to focus more on like analytics engineering for a little bit. But for some reason, one way or another, the world just has its ways. Somehow found myself in data engineering consistently through other clients. Like I'll get pulled into, hey, like Tim, we need someone who can help maintain this Airflow thing. Can you hop on? I'm like, yeah, sure. Or like, Tim, we needed someone to deploy post hog. Can you do it? I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? Next thing I know, I'm a data engineer again. So at this point, I'm
Wow.
just like, I've accepted it. I've accepted that like it is who I am, and no matter what titles I take up in the future, I'm just going to always somehow converge onto being a data engineer again. And yeah, like I mean, I'd like to think that data engineering scratches a certain itch in my brain of like being systems oriented, being able
Yes.
to think in foundations and in service of others,
Mm,
and being able to like focus on creating reliability and trust with other people
mm,
by producing good, high quality, resilient data or platforms for data.
mm.
Yeah, it's fun. And the amount of trade-offs that data engineering has to do to figure out, well, do I want to go fast? Do I want to go slow? Is it
Wow.
expensive? Is it not?
Right.
How frequently do I run it? How like
Right.
down from like that high level strategy down to as granular as, well, how do I configure this like Spark cluster for what I need it to do? It's the constant assessing of trade-offs just is
Mm.
super entertaining for me. And the blanket answer is it's always going to depend,
Yeah.
but it's always going to be a fun time to figure out, well, why does it depend and how does it depend for this situation?
I mean, I tell you, Tim, it's fast. I feel like the level of self-awareness that you have is refreshing. You like what you like and you double down on those things. I have heard you mention often, though, this phrase of raising the floor while extending the ceiling. And I'm wondering if you could unpack that a little bit for us. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, especially in recent months,
Mm-hmm.
which is like, so like everyone wants to reach that next level of maturity or ambition of like, well, okay, I got my dashboards in, let me do some predictive analytics.
Yes.
And then after that, let me do some prescriptive stuff and operational stuff.
Yes.
Like there's always people like everyone wants to always do a little bit more and to achieve some more and
Mm-hmm.
to be able to deliver something slightly more advanced.
Yes.
And I'm a strong advocate for, well, okay, let's do that, but also let's make a voice and leave space for like improving that baseline at the bottom too. So that yes, let's raise the ceiling, let's do more pie in the sky big stuff,
Yes.
but let's also be cognizant and aware that like, hey, like keep we can't be trying to fill a box that's constantly growing. Like we have to be able to like raise that foundation, build something stronger in that bottom in order to
Right.
keep yourself stable and give yourself capacity to do the more advanced stuff.
Wow. Wow.
So like for example, stuff like data quality. I mean, you can all like you can always just have it so that like yeah, like sure, like let's say like every morning you have someone who looks at some dashboards
Mm,
and says, "Hey, that data doesn't look right. I'm going to
mm,
go in and like look at the logic and fix it." And then eventually you're just like, well, okay, let's raise that foundation a little bit higher. Let's raise that floor
mm.
a little bit higher. Let's automate that with like DBT. Let's add
Perfect.
some tests onto it. Let's add some accepted values, some null, non-unique, maybe some generic tests that you wrote to like automate it so that like you don't have to look at the dashboard anymore. You just get the
Yep.
notifications if it happens.
Got it.
And then that leaves you more space to like, okay, now that saves me half an hour of my day that I'm no longer manually looking at data. I
Wow.
can do my more advanced stuff now. I can
Yes.
start thinking
Yes.
about more advanced work and like free up my brain to focus on this other work. And eventually you're just like, okay, cool. Now we have this data. Now we have these data quality tests that are automated. Let's bump it up some more. Raise that ceiling, raise that floor a little bit
Floor.
more so we can focus more on something, or so we can do stuff like anomaly detection. So we no longer just know like how a column, like whether it passed some heuristics or rules for testing. Now we
Yes.
know that like, when it drifts, when it changes or whatever. And that will position you so much better for raising the ceiling for all the LLM work, all the AI work, all the machine learning, advanced analytics stuff. Because at the end of the day, it's garbage in and garbage out.
Yeah.
And the more you invest in your foundations, the more it's going to pay off downstream, or
Mm-hmm.
in this case, like
Mm-hmm.
in the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like this entire time, like rather than just raising the ceiling and creating all of this more work for your data team to work on,
Right.
it's important to be cognizant. Like, hey, if I'm going to raise the ceiling, let me bring the floor up
Wow.
with it,
Wow.
so that I'm only still focusing on this much at
Yes.
any given time.
Man, what a framework. What a framework. And that, I feel like that's almost applicable even beyond the data profession, but it especially does apply in the data profession. I love to ask folks how much of their work is focused on maintenance or process type work versus building new features, maybe that's the raising of the ceiling versus maybe ad hoc troubleshooting. What would you say your mix is these days?
Let's see. Let's go from smallest bucket to larger bucket. It's a great question. Let's go for like, I want to say like 20% is like firefighting and troubleshooting.
Okay.
You know, I spend a decent amount of time just like figuring out like, hey, like, we have dozens of different source systems ranging from GIS platforms, construction project management software, vendor data, and data from all these other different departments across the company. And like inevitably things are going to break. Like, and we could do better about this. And we are intentionally trying to, you know, like raise our floor so we don't have to think about this in the future. But like right now, yeah, it's like I spend a few hours every now and then just trying to figure out how this data changed, how we lost access to something, how this config on something changed or whatever. Then about maybe like 40% of the time built on or focusing on like building new features or new data sets. Because we have a lot of cool projects we're currently working on, especially on like the spatial analytics side. And yeah, it's like, so we have like a lot of cool stuff, like figuring out like, yeah, how far is every store from something else?
Yes.
Like whether it might be some other random landmarks or other things going on. So like those are really fun stuff to work on. And then I want to say like, no, what's left? I guess the other 40% then is on like process improvement and maintenance and figuring out how to be better.
Right.
It's like right now we're like a really interesting point in our team's data journey. We're a fairly young team, like roughly like 2-3 years old. And the department has been hungry for more data. Wow. Literally every team has been asking, well, hey, can you help out with this? Hey, can we get more data about this centralized? Hey, can we grab data from this other department or team and bring it over to us so we can use it somehow? People are eager and ambitious, which is like a really nice problem to have.
Man.
And it's really pushing us to the metal as to like, well, how do we sustainably keep doing this?
Yeah.
Like if we're going to keep expanding our scope, our ceiling, so to speak, how can we keep raising our floor to accommodate for that?
Dang. This is exciting stuff, man. So team is just about 3 years old. How is the team, about how large is the team or how is it set up today?
Yeah. Chick-fil-A has a really great hub and spoke embedded model-ish kind of way. I am on the it kind of mirrors sometimes like a data mesh, depending on how you look at it. I'm on an embedded team within commercial real estate.
Okay.
Like right now, my team looks like 2 data engineers, 3 data engineering consultants that we work with to support specific teams who have like large amounts of asks and like really complex work to work on. We also have an analyst and a manager who does a whole lot of analyst work too. So yeah, we're roughly 5-ish or so people. Yes. Supporting 500, soon to be 1,000-ish people at some point.
Jeez.
So yeah, it's a tall order, and which is why like I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, well, how do we scale? How do we accommodate for it? How do we multiply so that like we don't follow a linear path of how many analysts or how many data engineers we need for 1,000 stakeholders.
Man, like I'm excited about the challenge that you guys are tackling. Actually, this sounds really, really fascinating. I'd be interested, Tim, in how tools like DBT, for example, might lend themselves to some of these big challenges you have, either with the complex asks on the ceiling end of the scale or improving your processes so that you can get more efficient without adding a ton more headcount.
Yeah. Let's start with the obvious answer, in which DBT is essential as a framework. And being able to have a solid foundation that is opinionated enough, but unopinionated in other ways to enable people to like free up their mind and focus on other things, and also give a platform to express stuff like documentation or testing. It's really nice to just able to have conversations with people and be like, yeah, I have this nuance or this business logic, and that's like, and it's like super complicated, and I'm just like, cool, write it down in the description for the column or put it in the model. Yeah, push it up, like let's go for it. And it's really nice to have just that source of truth where we can just push to and delegate to. And especially as we have other teams downstream depend on us and mature and grow and like want to do their own transformations, we're able to say like, hey, here's a DBT model. Do you want to contribute to it? Here's a DBT project. Do you want to like work on your own thing right now?
Mm-hmm.
And being able to create that platform that accommodates for the data analyst to the data scientist to the data engineer, the entire spectrum of users to
Yeah.
have like a cohesive like playground where everyone can conversate and speak the same language of like, yeah, and have the same context and understanding of like, cool, we got tests, we got documentation, we got descriptions, we've got tags,
Right.
we got lineage.
Right.
It's really nice to just have that like singular platform to facilitate the communication. It's like about as valuable to me as like pull requests.
Wow. Wow. That's good. That's good. Okay. This is exciting. Tim, you've painted just this phenomenal visual playground of all the cool projects that you're doing. And folks are like, man, I want to be where he's at. I want to do what he's doing. But I want to make sure we are grounded. I want to make sure the listeners are grounded in the reality that not everything is always roses. We don't have to talk about your current posting, but I know you've had some data disasters over the years. Tim, could you maybe paint a picture? Like, bring us into one of those stories of those data disasters that you might have faced in your.
I'm trying to think things through. Like, what would be a big data disaster
Yeah.
like we recently had? I want to say a lot of it is probably self-inflicted at this point in my life. Like, there are plenty of hard technical problems and
Yes.
like difficult things that I've had to navigate.
Yes.
But definitely it was just because like a lot of time I was just a little too eager, a little too ambitious and jumped straight into things.
Hmm.
It's like that is probably where I've stepped into the most trouble of just not taking my time asking questions
Wow.
or not taking my time and doing my due diligence.
Right.
It's
Right.
stuff like, well, okay, like for example, like I really should be asking better questions when people request data or just like, hey, they say they want like some metric sliced by whatever and whatever.
Yes.
It's like I have gotten myself into way too much trouble just running with assumptions, being like, oh, yeah, that's really easy to pull or really easy to aggregate. Let me just do it immediately right after
Mm.
finding out. And that has somehow always bit me about three
Wow.
months later.
Wow.
And it's so important to like what I've learned from that is it's so important to just sit down before ever like saying like, yeah, I'll do that, to ask
Yes.
questions.
Huh.
Not for the sake of like pushing back or saying, no, don't do this. It's for the sake of like, well, I want to make sure that you are actually going to get the answers you need and not
Mm.
necessarily the problem, not necessarily this like the direct thing that may look immediate because like things change over time, nuance
Right.
happens, and it's really important to like ask questions about that. We have, once I mentioned earlier, we have dozens of source systems. One of the first questions is just like, well, which source system are we talking about here? Like, which definition of this business concept are we talking about?
Hmm.
Because that varies depending on which system, which team we're talking about, which context.
Mm-hmm.
And I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely painted myself into too many corners. And that's something that I intentionally try to be better about. And I will always like flim and flam and keep making mistakes on, but I promise to them and I promise to myself I'll be better each time.
Wow. 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 Dang. Unvarnished. Like, I love it. I love it, Tim. You've brought up this concept of stakeholders, though, and I'm curious as to what your take is, how Tim, in particular, handles stakeholder communication, particularly when they're often not technical. Maybe they're not even well versed in asking good data questions. How do you have stakeholder empathy? How do you communicate to someone that isn't well versed in the principles?
Hmm. I touched on it briefly, which is really just keep asking questions, keep asking the whys, keep asking the hows, keep asking the context and the nuance about like what problem they're actually trying to solve. And I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the things that great people do, and not so great people such as myself do, is that everyone has a habit of strictly coupling the problem that they
Yes.
have and a
Yes.
solution that they think of. Like a lot of these requests are just like, well, I need this specific data.
Yeah.
And you ask, like, well, okay, why do you need that data? And
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, well, it's because I actually have this problem.
Got it.
And like as a data engineer, it's really easy to just say like, well, you don't need that data, you need this other data.
Okay.
And like many people, and I've definitely been guilty of this myself, like feel slightly attacked of just like, well, wait, why'd you question my understanding of the world? Why'd you question that like this solution isn't right? I'm just
Hmm.
like, well, we got to decouple this. We got to decouple and understand that like there isn't just one solution to everything, and that like your identity isn't tied to this pair of problems and solutions.
Wow.
And it's important to take a step back and think about, well, okay, like what is the right solution for this circumstance?
Yes.
And like everyone's looking at the world with different lenses. How
Mm.
can we find which is the right lens for us to look at cohesively as a unit, as a
Wow.
team, and how do we get to that answer there? Because I mentioned, like, I'm incredibly eager to jump to an answer often, and I'm incredibly guilty of that. And I often give an answer without, acknowledging what the problem is in the first place. And that confuses a lot of non-technical stakeholders sometimes because I'm just like,
Wow.
well, okay, well, why don't we just build a model for that? And they're just like,
Yep.
well, what's a model? I'm like, so, okay, yeah, okay, sorry. Like, so it's just like, yeah, just let me take a step back.
All
Let me
right.
just like talk through my thought process as to how we got there. And let's talk about what the problem you're trying to solve is and
Mm.
what solution I'm proposing and like the bridge in between them.
Yes. That sounds hard, Tim. I'll be honest. That sounds hard, especially if they've given you the problem. Maybe you've even asked a couple of the why questions. Now you've gotten down to a core problem. You've done the calculations in your head. You've processed about 5 or 7 steps ahead of where they are. And boom, you know what the conclusion, you know how the story ends. Now you actually got to say it out loud in words and bring them along with you. That sounds hard.
Objectively, it is hard, but I mean, it's absolutely worth it. I mean, like data is a very interesting space because like you are responsible for products, your products being your data, your products being solutions and platforms. But there are just so many different products you have. There's so many different stakeholders. Like
Hmm.
my team works with, I mentioned, hundreds of different people within the organization.
Yeah.
And
Crazy.
we have to spend our due diligence, be intentional about how we communicate, and
Mm.
work with each of those people differently. Like
Mm.
we have 4 or 5 different personas of people querying our data warehouse and figuring out how to work with that.
Goodness.
Like the way you talk to one team is different than the way you talk to the other team. And it's
Mm.
a tough problem to solve for, but it's incredibly important because at the end of the day, like these aren't stakeholders, these are humans, these are people. These are people that you've established relationships with and
Wow.
hopefully get trust with.
Wow. 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 That word trust is it's such a big, that's like a whole conversation. Obviously there's data trust, but you almost brought up a concept behind that, which is like data professional trust. You could give them the right data product, the right solution, but if they don't trust that you've been empathetic to their needs in the first place, they might not even use your data product.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like there have been plenty of situations where I'm like, okay, this other team produces data,
Hmm.
but like I don't really know how this is going to go, so like I'm going to pull that data myself. I'm just
Wow.
like, no, like that is a very reckless approach that I've historically taken in the past. And so I try to be better about that and try to be a better partner as a
Mm.
consumer and a producer of data of like, hey, how is this data supposed to be used? What's the source of this? How does this work? And it's so important to ask questions and build trust as a consumer and a producer of data
Whew.
with people that you work with.
Mm.
Because like this is more than just one individual. This is more than just one model or table. This is like how do you get like all the gears in this organization to go?
Right.
And that applied to small startups that I've worked at. That applied to like companies I consulted with. And that applies to this massive organization known as Chick-fil-A.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Man, he's dropping nuggets, y'all. I told you. I told you. I told you. This is fun. This is fun. We're going to have to wrap up very shortly because we're coming up on time. I'd love the opportunity to ask a few more questions if I may, Tim. One of those is this. How are you ultimately measuring your success as a data professional? This at times can be notoriously difficult for data professionals because their end product isn't necessarily something that's going to be sold to the marketplace. How do you quantify your positive business impact?
Well, the answer for this is always going to be it depends, especially
Mm.
depending on which organization you're in and how you're viewed within the company.
Okay.
And I think like the way that I'm currently viewing things is like how much time can you save the organization? And because as you mentioned, like data is not typically a revenue producing function of a company. It's operational. So, well, a lot of the questions are, so how much can you optimize these operations? And so, for example, like predating me, and I hear about these stories from other teams all the time now, is that the teams, like my teams delivered stuff that like used to take 2 weeks or 2 months or 6 months and required cross coordination across all these different teams and all these different experts and people to do. And now they're able to automate a lot of that and abstract it all away, in which a lot of things are just like a click of a button or a couple like form fills, and now they get their answer.
Wow.
And that's huge because saving, let's say, like 6 months of time across working with a dozen people, that is a whole lot of meeting saved. That's a whole lot of capacity saved. That's a whole lot of brain power saved.
Yeah.
And admittedly, like it's really hard to quantify. And so I think what I try to lean more into is, because it's hard to quantify stuff like, yeah, like how much time you save because of how many different stakeholders, how many people are involved with it. And there's a lot of other stuff like, well, trust. You can't really quantify trust. But like, so quantifying is a really hard thing to answer for me. But I think the thing I always lean into is like, well, how much joy does it bring people? It's like they're inherently related. Like if your work gives people joy, they'll trust you more. If they're able to do things easier, they'll feel more joyful about it.
Wow.
And I hate it when people don't enjoy their work. Like that like starts way up back in the career of what we were talking about at the top of this call, which is like, hey, like these people had horrible work-life balance. They're incredibly stressed out. And they're frustrated with the tools they were used, the skills that are being leveraged. And just the way that I measure everything with work is just like, well, how much joy does people feel around me? How efficient can they be? How much do they enjoy it all? Because I think like every metric, operational efficiency, time saved, revenue produced, it's all tying back to some feeling of like,
I love that. I love that. I've never heard it put that way before, but for something that's notoriously difficult to quantify, that qualitatively maybe is not that hard. I think good enough can be hard to measure, but there's a big gulf between good enough and joy. When your internal clients feel joy at using your data products, you'll know.
Absolutely.
That's wild. That's wild. Let's ask Tim one more question before he heads out. It's been exciting following your career thus far, Tim. Obviously, there's going to be many more exciting chapters to come. For someone who's maybe a little bit earlier in their career or interested in modeling after some of your career moves, what kind of advice might you give to them?
Let's see. It's weird for me to say this because a lot of my career has been hinged on and beneficial of like hitching my wagon onto individual tools and riding that. But I'm going to say that like in retrospect, the advice I'd give to people would be, as much as people tell you to learn and focus on be really, really good on an individual tool, do that, but also don't have it take up most of your time. Split your time about like, I would say like 80-20 between like learning good software engineering fundamentals, ICD, design patterns, so on and so forth. And like 20% into learning new frameworks and new tools. Like just enough to be dangerous and confident with, but like still with lots for you to learn in the future. And I think DBT is a really strong candidate for that because like as a tool, as a framework, it's incredibly lean. It's incredibly intentional as a framework of just like, well, here are these core things that you can reach for. Here are these core functionality, but the way that you do it well is purely dictated by you and your skill set that is unrelated to DBT, such as good modeling, good understanding of data literacy, like being able to like know what to look out for when it comes to data quality. Those are all skills that are necessarily like unrelated to DBT. However, like you need to be able to learn well, but DBT gives you an amazing platform to be able to express it on. Like stuff like that. It requires a balance. I'm not going to say like only focus on core concepts and design patterns and like technical skills. I'm also not going to say like lean heavily into like one tool or another, but just like find a balance.
Yeah, that's wild. That's going to stay with me. You have a favorite data movie, Tim?
I don't think so. I mean, if you really split it, I feel like every movie is a data movie. I don't really think I have an answer for this.
All right, we're gonna send you some recommendations and see if any of them catch your fancy. But good night. This has been revelatory, informative, and a ton of fun. This has been great, folks. We've been talking to the Tim Castillo, Senior Lead Data Engineer at Chick-Fil-A Support Center, not headquarters. He believes in scaling organizations by lifting the floor while extending the ceiling. That's another framework and principle that's really gonna stay with me. So, Tim, good luck to you with the 3D printing. And say hi to Steve the cat for us. This has been fun. Thank you, Tim.
Will do. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Bolaji. Really appreciate it. You have a great day.
Awesome. Hey, folks, you've been enjoying Data Career Transformations. Thank you to Tim once again. We will see you on the next one. Bye for now. This show is brought to you by DBT. DBT is the industry standard for data transformation. It allows your team to prepare data for analysis in a way that's centralized, modular, and entirely open, all inside your cloud data platform. The outcome? Consistently dependable analytics for your organization. Now, the DBT community was built for and by data pros. Come hang out and transform with 70,000 of the brightest analytics engineers, data analysts, and data scientists in the world. With DBT, you transform your data. With the DBT community, you transform your data career.